Guys, thanks for being here. Yeah, we're excited to talk to you about EOS and the impact that it can have in your business. Now, one of the questions that we often get asked when we're talking about processes and using technology to expand our reach as a company is, are you guys actually EOS implementers? And the answer is no, we're not. We're just super fans. We are not officially licensed. So take this all with a massive grain of salt. I would encourage you to do your own research on EOS to look into it and see how it can impact your business. But what I want to talk about today is how we've used EOS to self-implement within our own company and how the successes and opportunities that we've seen in using this platform, and also how we use this philosophy to help our clients. Because at its very core, in my mind, EOS is all about accountability. And accountability is usually the key problem in most businesses that we work with. So it's either an accountability issue for the team, where the team is not accountable to the leader, and sometimes it is the reverse, where the leader is not accountable to the team. So both things have to be true. But let's dive in and get started here. So first, let's talk a little bit about what EOS is in kind of just a high level perspective. So as mentioned already, EOS stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And this is really the best way I can describe it is it's a philosophy, right? It's a way of thinking, a perspective that you're adopting in relation to how you view your business. Now, for me, I like to take these ideas of how I view my business and also try to apply them to all the other places that I can in the world. Because what I found is that many organizations have the same problems, right? Whether it's a business organization or a church organization or a family organization, if you have a problem in one place, oftentimes there are mirror image problems in some of the other organizations that you're a part of. So I like to use this EOS philosophy in a lot of different places, including my own family. Um, but what we're going to expect, or what we're going to talk through today is kind of that high level view. We're also going to look at kind of some real world application, what this looks like in a property management business. We're going to do a very short demo of what an L10 meeting looks like. You may have heard the term L10 or level 10 meeting tossed around. We're going to show you how we do that internally here at Lead Simple and talk about how you can do that within your business, and then try to give you some takeaways that you can execute on this week. All right, so diving into those core components, there's six key components of the EOS philosophy, and these are what they are: vision, people, data, issues, process, and traction. So thinking about these core components, let's start with the beginning. So vision. Now, this idea of vision, why does vision matter? Well, if you don't have a clearly defined vision and a goal and a place that you're trying to get to, everybody's going to be going in different directions, right? Even if you, as the business owner or one of the leaders in the business, has a clear idea of where you're going, unless that's clearly communicated and the team understands and is in alignment with that vision, it's going to be absolutely nuts. Nobody's really going to know where you're going unless it's clearly defined. Now, in EOS, the way that we address this is we have your VTO, right? Your VTO stands for your Vision Traction Organizer. In that VTO, you're going to document a number of things, but related to the vision, you're going to have your 10-year, your 3-year, and your 1-year plan. Now, why are we looking so far into the future? Well, if we're not looking into the future, we're going to have the default of just kind of letting things happen. So in that 10-year plan, that gets us thinking through the what's going to happen farther out than I can really predict, right? We really don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. I was talking about this with my kids this morning at breakfast. We have a 9, 7, 5, and 1-year old. And they were all talking about, well, how old will I be when, so and so is 10 or 12? And my second youngest son, Richard, said, well, Dad, how old are you going to be when I'm 60? And I was like, oh, man, that's not a good number, man. That's feeling really old right now. But thinking that far into the future, even just imagining for a moment, is something that makes you very reflective, right? So when we're talking about this 10-year plan, we're getting a lot more reflective about who we are, who we want to be, what do we want to accomplish. And then that 3-year plan and the 1-year plan is really just helping you get to the 10-year plan, right? So the 10-year plan is to be really aspirational. If you think about where you are today, who do you want to be 10 years from now? right? That's our aspiration. And the 3-year plan, the 1-year plan, those help you get to the 10-year plan. Really, you're clarifying your core focus as a company so that you can make different decisions. One of the things that is really important about having a clear vision and values for your company is that it creates a filter for all your decisions. No longer is it, okay, we have this opportunity, should we do it or not? Instead, the question is, does this align with our vision as a company or with our values as a company? Is it in alignment with what we're trying to accomplish over the next 10 years? Now, the reality is those targets are probably going to change, right? You can pick something today, and a couple of weeks from now, you're going to be like, well, okay, well, maybe we need to adjust this a little bit. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with making adjustments to the plan. But having a plan at all is a far cry from just letting it all sit in your head. I'll give you another quick personal example here. About, I want to say 6 years ago, no, that's not right, 7 years ago, right after Hurricane Harvey that hit here in Houston, my family was flooded. We lost our home. We had to go and live in a dear friend's, or nicer than say a now dear friend, because we hardly knew them at the time, but a guest house that was an hour and a half from where I worked at the time. And what that meant is I had a lot of time to kill in the car, so I started listening to Bigger Pockets. I realized I wanted to invest in real estate, but I knew nothing about investing in real estate. I had no money to invest in real estate. I had zero connections to anyone in real estate. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to do this, so I'm just going to start talking about it. And I did. And everybody who I met, I talked with them about property management, about investing in real estate. And wouldn't you know it, within 6 months, I had a buddy who came to me and said, "Hey, Ben, I've got some money. I want to invest in some real estate with you." Right? I had zero expertise. I don't know what I was doing, but simply by saying it, making it a part of who I was, that made the impact. All right, let's move on. So we've talked about vision a little bit. Now we're going to move to people, and the verbiage here around people is having the right people in the right seats. And when we talk about having the right people in the right seats, gosh, y'all, people just make the business run. If you don't have the right people in the right seats, I know we have some people on this call who have been in the wrong seat before. I've been one of those people, right? When you're not in the right seat, your life, your work loses purpose. It loses meaning. But when you are in the right seat, when you are following your purpose, when you are following your giftings, this is where the opportunity happens. So, as the business owner or the business leader, it's your job to ensure that your team gets into the right seats. Great example on this call, we've got Chris. Chris is keeping this all running. Chris keeps our marketing moving forward. When I hired Chris, it was not for marketing. I hired Chris to be a project manager. And Chris was in that project manager seat for about 2 months. And then we realized, oh my gosh, Chris is not a project manager. Chris is a marketer, and we need a marketer. So Chris is now our marketer. And Chris has been able to do so much more as we've leaned into his gifting and ability and put him in that right seat. Now, how do we know when we have the right person in the right seat? Well, obviously, there's some giftings and abilities that we can see naturally, but also we need to understand what are the right seats in your bus, if you will, because not every company needs a marketer, not every company needs a project manager. In this case, property managers have a completely different set of people in your organization. Right? Depending on what your structure looks like, you may have a pod structure, you might have departments. Depending on how that's all broken out, you're going to have different roles and different responsibilities within the business. And having a clear idea of what your accountability chart looks like, who your people are, right? Not just your individuals, but rather the roles that are needed to contribute to the organization is key. Once you've got the organizational chart drawn out, you know who needs to be, or rather, what people and positions need to be in your business, then you can find the right person to sit in that seat. Okay, let's move on to the next point. So we talked about vision, people, now moving on to data or data, depending on where you're from. All right, so running on facts, not just the feelings that are much easier to run on, right? Why does this matter? Well, when we run on feelings, it's gut decisions. We are not necessarily running in relation to a vision, right? We don't have a specific outcome that we're looking for. As Zig Ziglar would say, we are a wandering generality, not a meaningful specific. And when you are operating outside of data, there's just a complete lack of structure. So when you bring in data, what are you getting? Well, you're getting security. right? You are creating a framework. You are forcing yourself to live within a certain guideline by forcing yourself to use data for your decisions versus making your decisions based on feelings. Now, where do we get that data? Well, obviously, we're surrounded by data. We've got companies that run up the wazoo in terms of software, right? So we got tons of data available, but you have to actually use it. And that's where we're going to talk a little bit in a minute here about the L10 meeting and when we can use that data in like a scorecard or a tracking system. But data is another really key component of the overall EOS philosophy. Our next part of the philosophy is issues. Now, when we're talking about issues, oftentimes we think about problems in relation to people, and we look at problems very subjectively. How does this affect me, right? And when we do that, we are really stymieing our ability to actually solve the problem. Because when we put ourselves at the root of the problem or we tie another person to that problem, the only solution to fix that problem is to remove that person. And that's not a good outcome. However, when we can look at that problem objectively, and say, okay, what's the cause of this problem? Not the who, right? What's the how did this happen? What are the contributors? What can we do to improve this process potentially? What can we do to train this person potentially? And looking at those problems as an objective opportunity to improve, this really changes the whole idea. Now, in the IDS framework, which is the identify, discuss, and solve framework that we're going to use in the L10 meeting, we have an open conversation, and we'll talk about this in a minute here in our L10 review. Each team member who's on that call, and for us, we try to welcome the bulk of the team on the calls so that we can have a lot of feedback within or from the front line and from leadership. That L10 is really an open forum. It's a time to discuss any issues related to the subject of that meeting. So, as an example, we have an operational L10 every week. And during that operational L10, we're going to talk about issues related to the operations of the company, usually related to how we deliver our service. Now, that can be true for a property management company too. However, you're going to have a lot more service components than you do here at Black Sheep. So one of the places that I often encourage our clients to start is with maintenance, right? Maintenance tickets are an ongoing and forever part of property management. And it's often a place where there's a lot of disorganization or not necessarily a lot of accountability. Your maintenance team takes the ticket and then they do it within their own time, and things can just kind of fall through the cracks there. So it's a great spot to incorporate an IDS or an L10 meeting where you start looking at each of those projects as an issue, right? What are the delays? What's keeping this on track or off track? How can we move this forward and ensure the work order itself is being completed as quickly as possible? All right. Our fifth point here in our list, just to recap again, vision, people, data, issues, and now on a number five, which is process. What are we doing with process? Well, we're creating consistency and scalability in your company. All of these points that we've talked about so far are important, right? People having great data, being able to identify issues objectively. But if we don't create processes where you can address the issues on a regular basis, where you're reviewing the data to ensure that you're staying up to snuff, where you're making sure that the right people are giving you the right feedback and that everyone's still in alignment with the vision, it's all going out the window. We've got to have a process. And with this process, the process looks different for everybody, right? Because every business is different. And this is why it's really important for every company to have a process-oriented culture. When you have a process-oriented culture, not only does your team run on processes, but we think in processes, right? We look at the business with opportunity for replicability. How can we take this particular thing that we're dealing with and make it easier? How can we make it happen again? Because we're going to encounter it again, right? And with property management, what does that look like? Well, you guys know property management is massively process oriented. And in the property management business, there's usually about 13 to 15 key operational processes that every company has. What we often see here is that when you look at those processes, the processes are melded together in various ways. As an example of this, maybe your onboarding process consists of your sales process and your owner onboarding and your property onboarding, maybe even a little bit of your marketing process. But the reality is that each of those pieces are their own separate processes and workflows. So it's important to be delineating and cutting when you're creating your processes and really focusing on the specifics of that particular process. What does that do? That gives you better data and it creates more accountability around that process. All right, the last key issue here for EOS is traction. Now, why traction? Well, on the front of the EOS book, if you've ever seen it, there's a tire. I think it's a great example. It took me a long time to get this, actually. The first time I was like, well, this doesn't make any sense at all. Traction, okay, I get traction, tire, whatever. But putting some thought into it, when we are creating businesses, we have this goal of creating something that's bigger than ourselves, providing for yourself, getting to a certain goal in life. Maybe you want to be financially at a certain level. Perhaps you want to travel the world. We all have some kind of dream or vision of what it is that we want to do, right? However, in order for that dream to happen, all of these other pieces of the pie have to be in place. Because if we don't have our processes put together and we're not able to look at our issues objectively and we don't have the right people and we're not looking at our data, everything just falls apart. But when you put it all together, this is when you gain the traction and the tire grips the road and allows you to make that forward progress that you haven't been able to make before. Now, the reality of this is that EOS has only been around like what, 10, 15 years. There's been a ton of businesses that have done amazing things for forever and a day, right? Just look back 100 years. There's incredible histories of amazing businesses. However, the principles of EOS have always been true. And if you look at any successful business from the last 100 years or even a larger time frame, I think you'll find that these principles exist wherever you go. Okay, let's go ahead and transition a little bit, and we're going to talk about an L10 meeting, and I'm going to share with you guys what we do here at Black Sheep and show you what one of our L10 meetings looks like. Now, I know Mike isn't on the meeting with us right now, but shout out to Mike. Mike has created an absolutely incredible tool where we run our L10s, and that is in Notion. You guys have probably heard of Notion. We've had a couple of calls about it recently, but I want to show you exactly what our Notion looks like for our L10s. So give me just a second here and we'll turn on the screen share. All right, this is a recently revamped, and we just had this meeting yesterday. Let's see, can I get some thumbs up? Tell me you can see the screen. Okay, good. All right. So talking through the L10 structure. So we always start at the beginning of our meeting with scorecards, right? This is when we're looking at our data. And the way that we're currently structured is we look at our data on an individual level, right? We're going to look at per person capacity to see where they stand, how busy they are. As an example, process Leviathan, that's Mike. Mike is way over capacity right now. So we're working on reducing Mike's capacity to a normal level. But by highlighting this information, it keeps it in the front of mind. It makes sure that I don't give Mike too many new clients, right? And that we start balancing out our load as we have new team members who are starting to level up. After we've reviewed our data, our key operational data, right? Again, we're not looking at all of the data here because obviously you've got buckets to look at. We're just focused on our operational data. And for you, this might be your ticket times, right? Your number of open tickets or open maintenance requests. You might even be looking at some numbers like average number of touches per maintenance ticket so that we're ensuring that we're solving things as efficiently as possible. Whatever those numbers are, they're going to live here at this first part of your L10. Then you're going to move on to your rocks, right? Now for us, this last quarter, right, and EOS runs on a quarterly basis, we've been focused on, for our operations, adjusting and solidifying our internal numbers, our performance numbers. For a long time, even though we have been an EOS company philosophically, we haven't been as strict to our own data as we'd like to be. So in the last quarter, we've made a really big push and we've gotten a lot more serious about our own internal performance data, doing a little bit more practicing of what we preach. And we're hoping to continue to level up on this as we go, just as you might be. Once we've done our review of our rocks, and actually just to be clear here on what a rock is, if you're not familiar, the concept of rocks is that the rocks are the biggest projects that need to be done over the course of a quarter. We have annual projects, we have rocks, which help us get closer to the annual goal, and then there are smaller projects that fall in between in the month. But this is a throwback to, I think it's an Aesop fable, where he talks about putting the rocks in the jar first, and then the pebbles, then the sand, and that's how you get the jar full. All right, but we're going to look at those rocks and we're going to share whether they are on track or off track. There is no good or bad here. It is really just a complete, or well, let's see, is it on track, right? Are we making progress? Are we going to complete it this quarter? Are we off track? We don't think we're going to complete it this quarter, or is it done? Right? And that's it. And again, the goal here isn't to throw anyone under the bus, but rather to say, hey, we said that this was important to us at the beginning of the quarter. We wanted to include it in our plan. How are we doing in making that happen? And also, do we need to bring in additional resources to make sure that this rock is accomplished? All right. Then we're going to move down to our clients. Now, for us, we have a smaller client base. As many of you guys know, we operate at capacity. We don't go over. We try to stay right at the red line. For property management, that's a little bit different. You can't have a list of 300 clients that you're going to review here every time that you have this meeting. However, you can look at the key issues, right? Doubtless, every person in your team has a key list of individuals or clients who they work with on a more regular basis where we know, okay, I need to do a little bit more kid glove here. There's a little bit more attention that needs to be paid. So however you do this, we like to do a quick review of our clients to ensure that if there's a problem with one of our clients, we're addressing it right away. We're sharing ideas and making sure that our team is able to deliver the most value to our clients. And in the interest of data, I'll just point this out. This is kind of fun. You'll see over here on this column here, we have capacity. And this is something we just figured out for our numbers that we assign a percentage value to each one of our clients so that each team member can have a set level of capacity. Now, we had kind of a rough number that we were running with, but assigning a percentage value to it allows us to track that more carefully. All right. Then we're going to go down to our to-dos. And in our to-dos, these are the items where we have individual responsibility. And these to-dos usually come from IDS. Now, we're going to look at the IDS in just a moment, but you can see we've got lots of different issues here, and we'll pick on me here. One of the things that we need to work on is our offboarding process. This is something that we have really been focused on onboarding and taking care of our existing clients. We've had a few clients who have wrapped up our engagements, and we need to do a better job of taking care of them. So that's on my overdue list and one that I need to spend some serious time on this week. But these items are all on track, off track, overdue, or in some cases, they are 30 plus days overdue. Now, why do we have this extra category? Well, if it's 30 plus days overdue, then we've decided that if an issue goes that far into the future without being addressed, it's no longer a priority to that person. And we need to rehash that issue and determine whether it's something that we still want to do or not. Does it need to be reassigned to someone else, or does it just need to be trashed because it was a bad idea, or it's just something that's not a priority right now? All right, moving down to our final section here, or let's see, yeah, our final section, part 4. This is our IDS. Now, we use these cards to document the various issues that we're going to be discussing. And as we go through each of these issues, we're going to open it up and we're going to take notes. We'll discuss the issue. We'll make sure that we have a solve. If there are tasks that need to be completed in relation to that, we're going to kick those off at that time and make sure they get assigned to the right people. All right. And then the final part of the meeting, let's see if I can get it. I think it didn't work. Oh, that's right. Yesterday it didn't work for some reason. But here at the very end, there would be a vote. Right now, why do we have a vote at the end? Well, the vote is to basically say how well or how useful was this meeting? How well did we do? And how useful? Did we actually move the needle? Right? Did we make forward progress in this meeting? And our goal is that, we're getting eights, nines, and tens. But sometimes we don't do that, right? Sometimes we get a 6. We're not allowed to vote with 7s because 7s are the number of mediocrity. A 7 is a safe bet, right? A 7 is just good enough. So we don't do 7s. It's got to be an 8 or higher to actually be good. But if it's a 6 or less, then we need to have a discussion, right? Something happened that wasn't positive. Something happened that wasn't actually beneficial to the conversation that day. All right. Let's see. Flip over to my notes here for a second, guys. So I'm curious, just to open it up for a second here, of the folks on the call today, is there anyone here who's currently using EOS or a similar methodology in your business?
We've been using it, but we're pretty early on. Read the books and like the system, and it's good to, any system's better than no system. So we're using Notion for the repository and for tracking. But yes, we're still sort of building it out, and it's a small team here, so we're not really that quick at getting it going. But I really love the structure that it brings.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm curious, as you guys are still kind of new to implementing EOS, what are some of the benefits that you're finding? Have there been any big aha moments where it's like, oh man, this this is really helpful?
Well, I really liked, first of all, just the visioning is really great. The ideas around traction, integrator, visionary, and the whole combination of how, you really do need to get the right people in the right seats. And the level 10, just the accountability and the level 10 meetings and the idea of they're really, when they're run well, they're very effective because you just fire through the key elements and then you get to solving the issues later on, but you identify them quickly, you move through stuff, you don't get into deep discussions on stuff that's irrelevant. So they're a really good focused way to keep everybody on track.
Yeah, and that idea of keeping everybody on track is really the key piece, I think. When we're in the depths of running the business, there's so many different things to do that it feels impossible to stay on track. There's
Yeah.
there truly are a million different things to do, right? We got to bring in new clients. We need to take care of the clients that we have. We actually need to deliver the service in property management, right? You've got tenants, you've got tickets to handle, you've got customer service. You need to work on your policies and procedures so that you've got all of that documented so future team members know how to take care of people. You need to hire, you need to train, like the list goes on and it never ends. But when you have kind of a central point of truth, then all of that can be related to something, right? It can all happen
Yeah.
relative to something. And I think that's really
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. You're in the trenches day to day, and then you can come up out of that and do the 10,000 foot view and
Yeah.
have the meeting and just refocus on the vision, remind yourselves and the team of the vision, and then get back to work again. But
Yeah.
you've course corrected.
Absolutely. Yeah, and actually, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Andrew, because one of the things that wasn't covered in that L10 that I just shared with you was our company vision and our company values. And we still review those on a weekly basis. We just do it in a separate meeting when we have kind of our company all hands, right? Our operations meeting is not going to have everybody from the company in it, but we do ensure that everyone from the company is hearing our vision and values on a weekly basis. And then also, another big thing for us is making sure that we maintain a positive framework and that we are celebrating our wins on a regular basis. So another thing that we do is we encourage each one of our team members to record their wins from the previous week. And it's not always easy, right? Sometimes it's like, ah, man, what good things happened in the last week? But when you do it on a regular basis, it gives you not only a better attitude, right? It helps us to kind of rewire our brain a little bit, but it also gives you something that you can track over time. And at the end of every quarter, you can look back at your list of wins. And instead of seeing just, well, another 3 months passed by, I guess it was good. Instead, you can see, wow, every week this quarter, I had some amazing things that happened. Like this was really good. And I remember that. And I'll give you an example. This Saturday, I got to hang out with some friends from church and I got to enjoy a cigar with a buddy of mine. And I haven't done that in a couple of months. And that was such a big win for me because I just really enjoyed that. It was a very relaxing, enjoyable time. And I'm going to remember that because I wrote it down. So even something small like that, where it's really just a very individualized personal experience, can be quite powerful. All right, well, back to my notes here. We're going to go ahead and kind of bring things to a close and wrap things up. So, some things that I want you guys to walk away with and just consider as you're going into this next week would be a couple of phrases. So, first, clarity creates confidence, right? When you have your vision, your roles, your values, your priorities, and all this is clear and documented, execution for you and your team becomes way easier. Now, obviously, it takes some work to do that, but it is so worth it. So again, vision, roles, priorities, and values. If you can document these things, give yourself a couple of hours, either during work or after work, whatever that looks like, and try to knock those out and give yourself at least a high level perspective on what those are. Next, measure what matters. Look at the data that actually is helpful. In the software ridden world that we live in, we have so much data available, it's just an absolute overload. So don't look at all the data, focus on your key outcomes, right? The KPIs that actually move the needle forward, and look at those on a regular basis. I would encourage you to try to knock it down to a list as short as 4 or 5 things per department, right? Because every business has departments. Even if you're not on a departmental model, you still have your sales, marketing, operations, accounting, HR, and leadership. All those parts of your business still need to have some level of metrics or KPIs. So think about maybe 3 to 5 key numbers that you can start tracking for those various parts of the business. And then the last thing I want to share here is that small changes or tweaks can equal big results. Even just doing something really simple, like you doing one L10 meeting or having a scoreboard or a scorecard that you're reviewing on a quarterly basis with your team, can have massive impact. So if you're not already in the process of using the philosophies of EOS, I would encourage you to start this week. Try to do an L10 meeting. It's relatively easy. There's a ton of simple formats that you can find online. I think we even have one that we will track down and post in the Facebook group here. That's kind of a rough framework for a property management company. And yeah, I think that's where we'll wrap it up. Guys, I really appreciate y'all being in and listening to my comments today. Open it up for any questions here for a minute or so, and then we'll wrap up. Any questions or comments that you guys would like to share?
You had mentioned using EOS with your own family. I'm curious about what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that I have done I would say in a very informal kind of way. Interestingly, I would say that my wife is the integrator to my visionary. However, as an integrator, she does not love documentation. And so while I can have this idea of, hey, let's write it all down and let's have a family vision and, here's our values and the things that we do, that's not necessarily super palatable to her. So the modifications that I've done is to work on that in my own head, right? And have that documented as much as I can for my own self, or recognizing that tool is mostly helpful for me. And then to set parameters around what that looks like with the family. So, as an example, I try to eat breakfast with my kids every day. And after we eat breakfast, I try to read the Bible to them for a little bit. That's part of our morning process. And then another process that we're working on being a little bit more consistent at, we're not great at just yet, is that I work up the street from where we currently live. So my wife and kids will walk with me up the street to go to the office and drop me off. And these are small things, but what we're trying to accomplish by having these small habits is reinforcing the culture that we want to have in our family. Now, everybody's family culture looks different, so I'm not saying you should do what we do, but I would encourage you to think about what is the culture that you want to have in your relationships, whether it's with your family, your spouse or significant other, or even just personally, what's the culture that you want to have, right? Do you want to be the guy who wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning and goes to work out? I want to be that guy. I find that really hard to do, but I'm really working at making that be true for me. But that may be something completely different for you. And I would encourage you to think about what needs to be true in order for you to make that happen and then make that thing true.